John Philip Santos came to Houston last summer to interview me for the Sydney, Australia event on quantum aesthetics. I knew one thing very clearly and almost instantly. I knew that John should not have been interviewing me. I should have been interviewing, learning from John. I feel the same way about Sebastiano, who's about to speak. This is a man whose intellectual and spiritual generosity is astonishing, as you are about to see. Seb, as I know him, is an Italian-Argentinian musician, author, and scholar. He studied social sciences at the Buenos Aires and Argentine Catholic universities. His musical accomplishments are well beyond what many of us outside that professional world can imagine, what I can imagine anyway. These are captured in the title, Maestro. In a single, insufficient line, Seb is music director of the National Congress Chamber Orchestra and artistic director of the Latin American Orchestra Conducting Academy. As a researcher of impossible phenomena, Seb also has a quarter century of experience. He is the author of 100 papers and articles. His UFO-related books include The City of the Blue Flame, The Lords of Uritorco, and most recently, Project Irx, which have taken on an international presence as they have been published in Argentina, Chile, Spain, and Italy. His book, The Other Toscanini, was published in the US. I first encountered Seb as an email on September 23rd, 2020, when this stranger wrote to ask if I would write a preface for a book he was editing on an Argentinian paranormal hotspot. I do what I always do in those situations. I dodged. I explained to this stranger that it all sounded wonderful, but that my high school Spanish was long gone and that I am a hopeless American monolingual in what I will generously call late midlife. That did not work. Not only did Seb insist, he immediately translated large chunks of the book so that I could get a solid sense of what the authors were up to and write an adequate preface. He guilted me out, essentially. Seb also introduced me to his Argentinian colleague, Juan Acevedo, whom we invited for this event, but could not be with us here this weekend, but who I am sure we will see and hear much more of in the future. So an email led to a friendship, which led to another friendship, and someday to a kind of shared thought that will hopefully reach not only across the Americas, but also across the Atlantic to Spain and Italy in particular. Finally, I believe I landed last night in a restaurant on a single word that captures Seb's courage, capaciousness, generosity, and pure intellectual mischievousness. That word is irreverence. Friends, please welcome the happy and always passionate irreverence that is Sebastiano. Thank you.
Hi, folks. Thank you so much, Jeff. I really love to be praised. So keep that going, please. So, this is funny. I'm going to improvise as a brief disclaimer before I read my little piece, but he sort of robbed that from me. I mean, I have a certain reputation back at home, as far as I can remember, as a troublemaker. And I also remember the Pope, which is, as you well know, Argentine, who was talking to a gathering of young people, telling them to make noise and generate trouble and, you know, be rebellious in a way. And, well, here I am, about to cause some damage, I hope. So brace for something. No, actually, after the very last lectures about from John Santos and Dr. May, I think I'm going to put you to sleep in 5 minutes, but that's good, I mean. Okay, so it's a privilege to be in charge of this last plenary address. I owe the honor to our dear Jeffrey John Kripal, yes, J is John, which is the main promoter of this initiative. I thank him with all my heart, thanks that I extend to his collaborators and to Rice University, which so generously shelters us. During these days, I have listened to so many people and I have learned something from each and every one of them. So thank you all. Let's go to our first slide. Thanks to my wife, PC work, by the way. Il y a assurément un autre monde, mais il est dans celui-ci. There is certainly another world, but it's in this one. What our poet Paul Éluard calls another world has received indeed dozens of names. Some resorted to adjectives: the alien, anomalous, archetypal, doomed, esoteric, extra-empirical, extraordinary, imaginal, immaterial, inexplicable, interdimensional, liminal, miraculous, mysterious, mythical, non-human, numinous, occult, other, paranormal, parapsychological, psychical, sacred, strange, supernatural, supernormal, supersensible, uncanny, unexplained, unidentified, unknown, unscientific even, and the visionary. Others try to define it with the use of nouns. Here the list is somewhat shorter, but even more frightening. Consciousness, cosmos, existence, flip, life, magic, mind, phenomenon, reality, religion, self, soul, spirit, transcendence, universe, world, even, why not, God. Some writers gave it suggestive proper names. Our good old Charles Fort called it X. Stephen King mentioned it. Our friend Juan Acevedo uses that. There are those who like to talk of high strangeness. And here at Rice, Jeffrey Kripal himself helps lead an exciting religious studies program he refers to as GEM, an apt acronym for Gnosticism, Esotericism, and Mysticism, three other words much at home here with us. In short, in any way with which we try to label it, we are talking about what brings us together now under the broad umbrella of the impossible, which, at least in part, is ourselves, of course, as both subjects and at the same time objects of our study. I will attempt to suggest a program that may find us united in pursuit of common goals now. To do this, I am going to mention 8 ideas related to the task that we may have ahead of us. What I suggest can be taken as a kind of little manifesto that we could take outside these walls, if you agree with it, of course. So please follow me through these 8 proposals. I will occasionally use them to tell you a bit about my own experiences and about what is being done in this regard in my 2 countries of origin, Italy and Argentina. So 1, get community interest, public support, and private funding for a comprehensive approach to the impossible. To pursue goals like the ones I posit here, we need to arouse the interest of vast numbers of people of all backgrounds, origins, and profiles. Those of us interested in the impossible, I'm afraid, we live in a ghetto. What is worse, some of us have collaborated in its building, and we even feel comfortable somehow in it. I guess the first step is to get out of that comfort zone and, as Schiller would say, embrace the millions. I think this is a crucial issue, both in the public and private spheres. Governments and institutions will do well to take an interest in these topics, seeking advice from specialists who do not pursue any agenda other than knowledge for knowledge's sake. And that interest should be transformed into financial contributions to research. The United States has an example of this in Robert Bigelow, the businessman who heads the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies, BICS. Both BICS and the legendary S. Allen Institute mark a path we should pursue. And with initiatives like this very one here now, Rice University places itself in this select group of institutions. Thank you for that. In Europe, the task of patronage carried out by Johannes Daviano Pius, better known as Hans Adam II, Prince of Liechtenstein, is as outstanding as it is isolated. In Latin America, where I live, as far as I know, there is no funding for this kind of research, not at all. My own 25 years of fieldwork, publishing, and lecturing are entirely self-funded. And I assure you, I'm neither a businessman nor a prince. I don't lose hope anyway. In any case, we need to reach more people and engage them better. And yes, also money. Please, let's try. 2. Study the impossible within the official academic world with different methodologies according to each discipline. I am far from believing that our university system, as it currently is, will find answers to our questions, but I do think that it should play an important role in coordinating our efforts to understand this side of reality. The participation of the academic community is not a sufficient condition, but it is a necessary one. If we are not studying what by definition is unknown and inexplicable, what on earth are we going to study? So I guess we have to study the impossible, and that means to study everything. We are so ignorant, and we have bought our cultural meta-narrative to a degree in which we are almost in denial of the ontological shock we are in. In the States, there are leading intellectuals who make invaluable contributions to the study of the impossible. To conjure just a few names, I will only mention here some scholars with whose work I am familiar, and leaving out those who spoke before me with this very same microphone. Agrama, Davis, S. Björn Hargens, Finley, Halperin, Lakatsky, Loeb, Kelleher, Mishlov, Nolan, Wald, and Wargo. In 2020, my dear friend Hussein Ali Agrama published a peer-reviewed article in the academic journal Zygon, entitled Secularity, Synchronicity, and Uncanny Science. One of the first to start from the idea that UFOs are objectively real. Sean S. Björn Hargens created an entire university curriculum that revolves around the impossible. And Jeffrey Mishlov is the first and only doctor of parapsychology in this country. In Italy, if I had to mention just one name, it would be that of Roberto Pinotti, a sociologist from the University of Florence and founder of the CUN, Centro Ufologico Nazionale, who has been carrying out a profuse activity since 1967. Among the younger generation, I cannot ignore Massimo Teodorani, a very gifted astrophysicist from the University of Bologna, author of books on consciousness, synchronicity, spirituality, combining a scientific, psychological, and philosophical approach. Now, in South America, an anthropologist from the University of Buenos Aires, also a dear friend of mine, Diego Escolar, published in 2 peer-reviewed academic journals an article on his interaction with intelligently behaving orbs of light at the Calingasta Valley in the state of San Juan, Argentina. I will repeat this because it's quite amazing. An article on his interaction with intelligently behaving orbs of light, an anthropologist on a peer-reviewed article on an academic paper. His work was published in Spanish in 2010 by Intersecciones en Antropología under the title Calingasta X-File. and in English in 2012 by Anthropology and Humanism as Boundaries of Anthropology. Wonderful title. Reworked, the text also appeared recently as a chapter in the book Trabajo de Campo en América Latina, edited by Rosana Guber. Good for you, Diego. I personally edited this book Jeff was mentioning, a volume entitled Proyecto ERCS Project, dedicated to the Mount Uritorco hotspot, which brings together contributions from 12 university intellectuals: a psychologist, a computer scientist, a psychiatrist, a sociologist, an arts historian, that would be me, an osteopath chiropractor, a cultural anthropologist, an archaeologist, a philosopher, a historian, a pedagogue, and a transpersonal anthropologist. This work was published in Santiago de Chile and Buenos Aires with this wonderful foreword by Dr. Kripal. This is the only book of these characteristics to be published in Argentina and South America so far. So right now we have far more questions than answers, that's for sure. The university system is one of those places from which to ask these questions. So please, let's try. 3. Disseminate the studies of the impossible and take them to the mass media in a credible way. If many initiatives should start from the academy, most of them should be filtered to society as a whole, through informative books and journalistic reports. In both cases, a mixture of rigor and content and simplicity in form should prevail, I think. Too often we have seen university isolating itself as an exclusive bastion of elite intellectuals, forgetting that it has to serve its community. In this regard, what mainstream journalists as Leslie King, did I get it right? George Knapp and Nick Pope have achieved in the United States is an example to consider. No less important is the testimony of experiencers like our dear Whitley Strieber here. Whitley exposes himself fully in his work, not just as an abductee, but as a human being, reflecting on his experiences in books that have become increasingly philosophical over the years. If I must be honest, I think that Whitley's thought has barely begun to be valued. In Italy, this kind of dissemination effort is led by Adriano Forgione, who is a magazine editor and book publisher in Rome. And in Argentina, one of the few journalists who deal with these issues insistently is named Alejandro Agostinelli. Personally, I managed to get the main newspaper of the second most important city in Argentina, which is Córdoba, La Voz del Interior, to publish a full-page story on my Uritorco-related research from an anthropological and sociological point of view. That was on February 2, 2020. The dissemination of the impossible has a painful flip side, made up of improvised authors and unscrupulous journalists who seek to attract attention and profit. Poor quality reporting and scandalous journalism do enormous damage to the study of these topics. It is in fact guilty of much of the disrepute that we suffer and that terrifies conservative scholars. We have to expose these people for what they are, invite them kindly to earn their daily bread in less important areas than these, kindly. Please, let's try. 4. Engage the disbelief of the overly materialistic, rationalistic, scientific, and positivist reasoners. And please, do not want to kill me and just wait for number 5. You'll see I'm not that crazy or suicidal. Or perhaps yes. Scientific disciplines have enormous value, but they are only one of the tools in our toolbox. Trying to accommodate the multiform reality of our life experience to the methodologies of modern science produces results that we already know. The discarding of a large portion of reality that refuses to submit to such rules. This is to fall into scientism, which is the religion of science. Many impossible phenomena, don't get along with the hardcore of the scientific method. Control experiment, testable prediction, quantifiable data, mathematical models, and laboratory replicability. They tend somehow to be less material, less objective, and less communal than what science usually studies. The problem, of course, is that they happen anyway. That they are mostly immaterial, subjective, and individual in nature does not detract from their existence. Rather, it complicates their apprehension. Let us not forget that, to us, everything that happens does so when we perceive it. So it's all about perception. You remember Stanislav's gorilla? Perception. In other words, what is specific about the impossible phenomenon is lack of direct transmissibility, since it's usually based on a strongly personal experience. For the experiencers, it has absolute proof weight. They usually say it's more real than real. But for their interlocutors, it is a story as extreme as it is unverifiable, at least sometimes. We are therefore faced with an ontological question, type of reality, type of existence, that poses an epistemological problem, type of discipline, type of methodology. It is a fragile situation for sure, from the empirical point of view, but in the end, nothing new. Many aspects of our daily life share this very same problem. To accept Elizabeth Crohn's near-death experience, do we need to electrocute her to death again and revive her again, Frankenstein style, to see if her story really can be verified? Nonsense. Even without the methodological guarantees of the natural sciences, we do advance in our knowledge of many areas, even making life or death decisions, and no science involved. The soft or social sciences present the same situation to a lower degree. However, they seek to adhere to, as much as possible, to the ideal of rigor, accuracy, and objectivity of the hard sciences. Now, I'm not sure that this is always correct or useful. I tell you something, as a musicologist, an art historian, I have read too many papers and books in which pages upon pages of pseudo-scientific jargon, empty technicalities, and rigid methodologies end up ensuring we don't get anything out from a Brahms symphony or a Picasso painting. In America, some consider the soft disciplines not worthy of being called scientific, and the term humanities is preferred to human sciences. I don't really know if it is an insult or a compliment, but the truth is that in humanities we do have useful tools, be they hermeneutical, critical, speculative, or comparative, both synchronic and diachronic. The trick may be simple enough. We should look for the methodology that can best cover the object of our study, and not the other way round. I think that hard sciences can contribute to the study of the impossible, and I am sure that soft sciences can make important contributions. If one of the many names of our object of study is God, philosophy and comparative religion studies will possibly give us some better results than, say, chemistry. But of course, our humanities will have to evolve out of their golden cage of culturalism. In any case, anchoring oneself to the linear causal physicalism of science when studying the impossible, I think it did not work well up until now and produce a kind of professional debunkers we don't really need. These reasoners I'm referring to seem very sure of themselves. But new discoveries require a much more flexible approach, curious attention, an open mind, and a lot of creativity, not just science. Please, let's try it. 5, and now perhaps the other half of the audience will want to kill me. That's fine. I've been dead before. Engage the belief of the overly metaphysical, irrational, anti-scientific, and negativist believers. Welcome to the other side of the coin. Scientific disciplines have enormous value and produce much knowledge. Therefore, its toolbox cannot simply be ignored, especially if it is due to laziness or because some experiencer believes he's the one to lead us all into the future. Denying the importance of modern science, technological progress, and disciplined knowledge is absurd. It leads us to a kind of pre-cultural state in which we only have belief, faith, doctrine, and a personal conviction that knows of no arguments. It is the messianic attitude of so many contemporary gurus who claim to be well beyond logic, reason, and science, while living in houses built by engineers, driving around in cars, using air conditioners, having hip replacements, and of course, while preaching thanks to telephone, radio, television, and the internet. As we have said, many impossible phenomena tend to be immaterial and subjective in nature. However, immaterial and subjective do not necessarily paint a scenario devoid of intelligence, reflection, criticism, study, research, and debate. Quite the opposite, actually. They take place in the center of that scenario together with such fundamental life experiences as being born, growing up, falling in love, becoming parents, growing old, and dying. On the other hand, today only a willing ignorant is unaware that cutting-edge hard sciences are coinciding with some philosophical ideas from remote Eastern antiquity. To put it in other words, the difficult transferability of impossible experiences is not an obstacle for them to be studied to the last consequences with what we could call a scientific mentality. So we can and must operate with rigor and accuracy in pursuit of consensus building, faster progress in the areas of study, greater explanatory capacities, and cumulative knowledge. Now, I cannot scientifically replicate my love for my wife in a lab. I hope. But before I moved in with her and planned to have a life together, I sat down and thought about it carefully. So feelings and intuitions belong to another plane of reality in relation to thoughts and reflections. But as any psychologist knows, they are compatible and they should work together. I have already mentioned the damage done by unscrupulous authors and journalists. It's time to mention the damage caused by the frauds and fakeries of swindlers and by the delusions and fudges of fanatical fideists. For years, the focus of my work was to unmask such people who abound in our world. If anchoring oneself to the most rigid methodologies of science may be no good, ignoring millennia of culture and centuries of science, I think is also no good. I don't think we need new prophets. The believers I am referring to seem too sure of everything, exactly as the reasoners I mentioned. So maybe we should all try to be a bit scientific, a bit philosophic, and a bit artistic, like that guy named Leonardo da Vinci. Please, let's try. 6, consolidate a scientific and epistemological paradigm shift already underway in the hard sciences in line with what Kuhn theorized. So one way to foresee the future is by looking at the past, in my opinion. I think Thomas Kuhn did that back in 1962. That's the year of the founding of Esalen, by the way, and the year of Jeff's birth. So many meaningful synchronicities do happen. That was the year in which Kuhn published The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. You are very aware of this book, of course. I think Kuhn's time has come, although perhaps not in the way he imagined. I understand that such a forward jump in paradigm could be paired with a backward jump in paradigm. In 1871, Giuseppe Verdi perceived how troubled the musical world of his time was, said, "Let's go back to the old and it will be progress." Torniamo all'antico e sarà un progresso. And perhaps he was right, and not only regarding the arts. If such a critical mass of unexplained phenomena forces us to complete a paradigm change at an epistemological level, and if we need to turn to new disciplines, perhaps it's not that crazy to first look to the past in search of what we used to know and maybe have forgotten. Now be patient with me, very patient, as expressing this idea will take a few minutes. Some of the ancient cultures had as their founding pillars the belonging of man to nature, his being a social animal, considering our planet a living being, the communion with the universe, mankind's dialogue with the gods, a spiritual way of being initiated into the mysteries of knowledge, and a philosophical way of teaching. In short, a cosmic gnosis, which today we can only in part glimpse. This and other intellectual and spiritual values after millennia of development reached their apex with the episteme of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, with nuances and contradictions that we don't have the time to pursue here, of course. It was without a doubt a world very different from ours, as the surviving text, artifacts, and buildings tells us. However, in a relatively short time, between the first millennium before Christ and the 7th century of the Common Era, the expansion from the Middle East of the three Abrahamic religions took central stage, reducing to a bare minimum the mysteries of paganisms, the ways of Gnosticism, and a certain kind of philosophy as the main way of seeking knowledge. From my personal point of view, the Middle Eastern religions we inherited from Father Abraham were one of the reasons we forgot much of the Greek episteme. Also, this new religio repositioned us in the universe, from coexisting with a long list of gods, demigods, and spirits, with diverse interests and often in conflict with each other, we became the kings of the planet and the sovereigns of matter, in addition to the main link between nature and the only God. By doing this, we lost contact with some of the impossible things that yet continued to coexist with us, below us, next to us, above us, and I'm afraid, in us. The next historical step, that of secular scientia, was no less revolutionary. Starting in the 15th century, in an even shorter period of time, European science occupied the central stage held by Near Eastern monotheisms until the Middle Ages, with Copernicus, Bacon, Galileo, Descartes, and Newton. Those very great men and their very great successors, thanks to whom I was able to fly from Buenos Aires to Houston, did not bury religio, but they ended up erasing almost all visible traces of the oldest past. Scientia and religio win over episteme and gnosis. So Latin beats Greeks. So far anyway. All of this leads us closer in time and space. 2022, America. Here we are positing the need for a new form of science, perhaps the science of the future. Nietzsche would say, I bring you the super science, the Überwissenschaft. In any case, a framework of disciplines that does not have the social sciences, humanities, philosophy, and arts as decorative appendage, but rather as its core. It would not surprise me if the gnosis and the episteme of antiquity had much to do with this. I certainly hope so, and could coexist with some of the main ideas of the great religions and with the advances of Newtonian science. I like to think that while we will continue to use the latest version of WhatsApp, we'll once again interact daily with the gods, demigods, and spirits with whom we live. The new scientific paradigm must be better than the current one, in the sense of being able to broaden our horizon of knowledge, but that doesn't mean that it will be omnipotent, infallible, or universally applicable. Actually, it may start from the founding principle of not being that. Otherwise, we could fall into what has been rightly called science delusion. Once again, the illusion of believing that a knowledge tool can do anything and is more important than knowledge itself. Please, let's try it. 7. Seek a cognitive and ontological paradigm in which sapiens embraces a radical environmentalism and the impossible as possible. Rethinking science in specific terms will also imply rethinking the way we reason, the very structure of our thought, as individuals and above all as Western society. Sadly, I have just told you the bad news. Science, even a better science, including this new old super science that we are theorizing about, will never be able to have universal application, because our very way, our anthropocentric way of knowing, thinking, and interacting, it doesn't have it. It is not just about going back to the initiatory spiritual and philosophical knowledge developed in antiquity up until the very first centuries of the Common Era. Nor is it only about placing our religions and sciences in a different place. I think we will need to consider other forms of Sitz im Leben, different ways of facing the world around us. We should be willing, perhaps, to consider that such world is not a mere set on which we act out the play of our existence, but rather a whole to which we are inextricably united. And I want to be very emphatic on this, that we should immediately stop damaging. Examples of alternative approaches are at our fingertips. Native Americans had, and to some extent still have, a way of living with the world that has little to do with the living in the world of Westerners. We are so conditioned now by utilitarian logic and accumulation and revenue, and for centuries a tool such money has become the center of our attention instead of a means to an end. Think about it. We want to advance, succeed, conquer, earn, win, accumulate, and rule. And be right, of course. No matter what or how. Nothing new under the sun, of course. Homo homini lupus, as Hobbes wrote. Yes, but not always, not everything, not everywhere, not to this degree. In the Americas, at the arrival of Columbus, there certainly were great civilizations with very complex sociocultural frameworks. You know, Olmecs, Mayans, Aztecs, Incas. But they usually oppressed another kind of people. A vast percentage of inhabitants who lived according to a different paradigm with more flexible organizational models and less rigid pantheons. Those Native Americans experience a being with the nature they call good living. It's actually untranslatable, but something like good living, imbued with a spontaneous environmentalism, somehow between animist and pantheist, with a conception of time that Westerners have lost sight of. But that lost forma mentis can be retrieved. You already got my point. Some of what we need for the future may indeed be found in the past. If we manage to take such a step, perhaps we will be back to the magical reality that the ancients lived in, but without denying the sophistication of our scientific and technological postmodernity, or the value of religious thought. I certainly agree with Jeff that the supernatural is not the natural. That is the whole point, of course. But I would argue that this is so for us, here and now. It was not so in ancient times. It is not so for the surviving Native American cultures, and it may not be so in the future. The impossible can indeed become possible, the paranormal normal, and the extraordinary ordinary. Let's keep in mind that for an Andean medicine man, not only we are not internally divided, we are integrated with what we could call pleroma in Greek, unus mundus or anima mundi in Latin, nature, creation, cosmos, consciousness, or, well, again, yes, God. I do believe this. When we lost our daily coexistence with the impossible, we became an unanswered question for ourselves. Ironically, we had the hubris to baptize our species with the pompous name of Homo sapiens sapiens, the man who knows and knows that he knows. Just to be really crystal clear, at no time do I suggest we abandon centuries of science, philosophy, and culture. No way. I suggest the opposite. We already possessed many intellectual tools for this process, but we have to use them perhaps in a new way. Philosophically, we may need to abandon the Cartesian model and aim to reconsider all possible developments on Franco-German idealist philosophy, in which consciousness is the starting point. And perhaps, I don't know, some Alexis Carrel, some Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, just thinking out loud. As the Colombian anthropologist Luis Eduardo Luna, hi Luis, said, if we persist in thinking with Cartesian terms, in addition to res extensa and res cogitans, we will need to embrace something like res magica. In any case, I think we should make the Shakespearean quote, there are many more things in heaven and earth that are dreamt of in your philosophy, obsolete. Our philosophy should account for the greatest number of things that populate heaven and earth. Please, let's try. 8 and last. Good timing, actually. Connect researchers who have been working in isolation due to geographical, linguistic, and financial constraints. This is very, very, very concrete. One model widely used in the humanities is the center-periphery relationship, as you know. And there are certainly centers and peripheries. It does not matter here whether the state of affairs is good or bad, fair or unfair. It's just here, and you have to take it into account, if possible, in a smart way. I believe that with the exception of our dear Jacques Vallée, who has lived in the United States for 60 years now anyway, I am the only plenary speaker whose native language is not English. In a way, so I am a representative of the periphery in the center. So let me spend my last few minutes sharing some thoughts about this center-periphery model. An important part of the literary output on the impossible is produced here in the States, or at least in the English tongue, the language of the center par excellence. But there is much that is produced in other countries and in other languages. The situation is bad both ways. But it is not symmetrical. A more or less reasonable percentage of the production in English is translated into other tongues, but the opposite is not really true. The consequences for the social construction of knowledge on a planetary scale can be disturbing. There is no doubt in my mind we need the most valuable books and papers on the impossible to circulate, and not only on the impossible, by the way, to circulate in the 6 main languages of Western culture: English, French, German, Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian. But also, if possible, in the 5 languages that are spoken by the largest number of people on the planet. That is Mandarin, Hindi, Arabic, Bengali, Russian, and Indonesian. I'm sure you remember Esperanto, the international language invented by the Polish physician Ludwig Zamenhof, right? The word Esperanto comes from the Latin spes, which is in Italian speranza, in Spanish esperanza, in French espérance, and in Portuguese esperanza. In German it's Hoffnung. Yeah, lovely language. In English, of course, no, I mean it, I love it. In English, of course, it's hope, hope. So it's all about the hope of being able to understand each other. My admired Whitley Strieber recalls his wife Anne saying that we are too young a species to look for answers and we have to look for questions. I really agree. But that doesn't mean that while some are looking for questions here, others might have already found them there, or even outline possible answers. I like to speak of what I know firsthand, so I should probably shut up. In South America, and particularly in Argentina, there have been valuable research and theory on the impossible for decades now. I will mention below only some of it, limiting myself to people that committed their efforts to publish books, and we will probably not recognize those names. Psychologist Juan Acevedo and psychiatrist Nestor Berlanda are writing their theory of that, which encompasses everything we call paranormal, working on the interrelation of non-ordinary states of consciousness, near-death experiences, quantum fields, phase experiences, and shamanic lineages. Journalist Alejandro Agostinelli, which I already mentioned, and historian Fernando Soto Roland have been dealing with the supernatural since the early 80s, advocating a sociological, anthropological, and historical approach that takes time to really materialize in a field full of researchers with the best intentions, but, alas, little methodology. Historian Juan Pablo Bubello and anthropologist Pablo Wright are studying the history of esotericism and minority spiritualities with a special interest in their deployment in today's much troubled and multicultural Argentina. Political scientist Leopoldo Buderatsky and philosophy professor Ariel Sarvi analyzed the Weltanschauung and the internal logic of several groups of self-proclaimed contactees operating in the Argentine state of Córdoba, which we already mentioned because of Mount Uritorco, if you recall. Art professor Carlos Ferguson and sociologist Rubén Morales have been investigating UFO phenomenon since the 70s, with emphasis on well-documented cases in South America. They have compiled and systematized and published hundreds of reports and pictures. Computer scientist Fabián López and anthropologist Diego Viegas were members of the now dissolved Círculo de Investigadores del Fenómeno OVNI, CIFO, of the city of Rosario. They recently edited very valuable books that I would say transcend the UFO phenomenon. So the Archives of the Impossibles team has uploaded to its website a PDF file containing the names of all these authors, plus the titles of 31 books by them, their publication data, and a scan of their covers. So if you want to peruse it, you will find it on the Position Papers page of the Impossible Archives website. This body of work is actually easily accessible and is available to anyone who can read Spanish or wish to help provide an English translation. Please, pretty please. Knowledge must circulate and be interdisciplinary, not exist separated into watertight compartments, neither for methodological reasons nor for national, material, ideological, economic, geographic, and much less linguistic constraint. I am positive that a question asked by a French-speaking Canadian might have an answer in an Arabic-speaking Egyptian, or vice versa. Also, and I cannot stress this enough, if we intend to establish communication with a transcendent, arcane, and mysterious other out and up there, the first step is to establish communication between ourselves in and down here. And that's precisely what we are trying to do right now. So please, let's keep trying. Well, the task at hand is huge. I remember an inscription on a sword: "If your hand trembles, do not wield me." I suggest we take up the sword, crying out loud, "Wake up, still." Now, considering my tendency to look to the past for solutions in the future, I may have not unveiled anything new at all here. But surely there is one novelty, and I'm very happy about it. What once was spoken in a whisper and underground today is being discussed in public and from one of the most prestigious universities in the Northern Hemisphere. Talking about hemispheres, here's my valediction to you all. The first invisible college, a term of Rosicrucian origin, functioned in England in the 17th century around the philosopher and scientist Robert Boyle. In the 1960s, here in the United States, a new invisible college was established, led by founding fathers of ufology such as Joseph Hallen Hynek and our revered cher maître Jacques Vallée. But doubt not, there were, there are, and there will be other such colleges, of which we know little or nothing. For my part, I will only tell you this. Such an invisible group of scholars is operating in Argentina. It intends to go beyond, way beyond both reasoners and believers. Over there, far south, the Spectral College is working on everything we discussed here at Rice. So brace for impossible findings. Finally, my dear friends, please let's not just try. Let's do it together. E pluribus unum. Thank you.